Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemel, and we're here every Wednesday at 10 a.m. to talk about business and professional matters, wealth building, and all of those issues that pertain to our economic lives. And today is our monthly Economic Echoes, where we look at various economic indicators and break them down so we can see how is the economy affecting us as individuals, affecting our families, our ability to take care of them, all of those things that frankly really matter. And as I always say, we don't live the national economy. We live each of our individual economies. And so we need to develop the ability to take the information that's being put out and see how is this affecting how my family and I live our lives, and what decisions do I make on that basis. And so as I normally do, I'm going to start out by talking about inflation. And here we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, so inflation over the last period went up 0.3% in November. And the non-core inflation rate, which is inflation minus food and energy, went up it went up 0.3% in November, and it went up annually, in other words, year over year, 2.7%. Okay, so this is, if you've been hearing that inflation has been ticking up, it has indeed. And perhaps a little more disturbing is the inflation rate on the sort of what they call the core inflation rate, which is the inflation rate less food and energy, also went up 0.3%, but went up 3.3% over the last year. So if we keep in mind that the Federal Reserve's target rate is 2%, okay, we are certainly above that rate, especially on the core inflation rate. Now, the Fed is meeting today, December 18th, to decide whether to lower interest rates again. My guess is they are going to lower interest rates 0.25%. And you may be asking, why is the Federal Reserve going to lower interest rates? Won't that cause inflation to continue to heat up? And yes, indeed, that would seem to be the case. And given here's the problem. The perception right now is that interest rates are high. Now, historically, that is not the case. So mortgage interest rates on home loans of 6 to 7% are not high. That's a normal level for home loan interest rates. Okay, but because interest rates were so low for the last 30 or 40 years, they seem to be high, especially for people who are moving into their prime home buying age range, right? And so this is a problem that the Federal Reserve is trying to deal with. There's also another issue, and I don't think I've talked about this. The Federal Reserve used to have one job, and that was keeping prices stable, which is currently defined as keeping inflation under 2%. However, a number of years ago, I think it's actually almost 20 years ago, the Fed was given a second job, and that is to what so-called full employment. Now, full employment is a term of art. It's an economic term, right? Because for you or me, full employment means I'm working, right? But from the national economy's standpoint, full employment means that, in essence, everyone who wants a job essentially has a job, and there's been a lot of discussion as to what the so-called full employment unemployment rate is, right? Because what that doesn't sound right. How can there be a full employment unemployment rate? And the answer to that is there's a certain percentage of people who are switching jobs in a healthy economy. Okay. So if literally 100% of people who are looking for a job have a job, and nobody is unemployed, that's not good for the economy, because that means that there's no economic mobility. There's that as different industries grow and shrink, people are not moving into other industries. Okay, so for many years, excuse me, the so-called full employment unemployment rate was thought to be maybe 2 to 3%. And then as employment became persistently higher, it was decided maybe it's more like 4 to 5%. And to a certain extent, I don't think this is a somewhat academic discussion. For our purposes, the full employment is when somewhere around 96, 97% of people who are looking for a job have a job. Okay, so the problem for the Fed is the Federal Reserve, which is known as the Fed. The problem they have is lower interest rates tend to make it easier to hire. Higher interest rates tend to make it more difficult to hire, right? But the reverse is true of prices. Okay, so lower interest rates tend to cause inflation. Higher interest rates tend to snuff out inflation. Okay, so the two jobs that the Federal Reserve have work in opposite ways, given the main tool that really the main tools that the Federal Reserve has in order to fulfill its mandate. And so this is why, by the way, you've been hearing, not the only reason, of course, but this is one of the reasons why I think you've been hearing discussion about the future of the Federal Reserve. So some people are talking on one end of the range that it should be gotten rid of. There should be no Federal Reserve Bank system. We tend to think that because it exists now, it always existed. That is not That is not the case. For at least half of America's existence, there was no U.S. federal bank system. Others are saying that the Federal Reserve needs to come under direct control of the president, and that this idea of it being an independent organization is really a fiction. There are other people who are saying that it needs to go back to its original mandate of price stability and get rid of the mandate of full employment. So, and I think these are all good discussions for us as a country to be having, because the Federal Reserve certainly did not handle the last surge in inflation well, and it certainly seems to be too mired in the political consequences of its decisions, rather than just fulfilling its duty. So, having said all those things, let's now dig into the inflation numbers as we do. So, major categories, again, inflation was up 2.7% over the last 12 months. Okay, and actually, wait. Okay, yeah. Okay, now food was up 2.4%. And we can see that food at home went up only 1.6%. Food away from home, restaurants, 3.6%. Okay, so if you don't eat out very much, like me, I don't eat out very much. So my food prices, my food costs probably didn't go up as much as other people who eat out a lot. Okay, now let's look at this. Here we go. So we can see that meat, poultry, fish, and eggs went up 3.8%. Okay. And the next highest increase was alcoholic beverages, which went up 2.8%. Okay. And then you have, dairy 1.2, fruits and vegetables 1.1, and then other food at home 0.7%. So if you eat a diet high in protein, meat, poultry, fish, and eggs, and you drink a lot, you experienced inflation on food prices much higher than if you eat a diet of primarily dairy and fruits and vegetables and cereals, things like bread and those kind of things, where prices actually went down. Okay, so what you eat in your diet, you and your family, what you and your family eat, has a big impact on how you're experiencing inflation. Okay, now energy costs went down by 3.2% over the last year. Now, energy commodities went down 8.5%, whereas energy services went up 2.8%. So let's drill down. Okay, so fuel oil went down 19.5%. So if you live in the East, where you use fuel oil to heat your house, excuse me, you may have felt like, well, gosh, inflation was 2.7%, but I feel like I'm actually doing better. Well, that may be because fuel oil costs dropped by almost a fifth. Okay. As well, gasoline went down by 8.1%. So if you drive a lot, again, your cost of living dropped. Okay. Now, if you live in a state like California, where we have gasoline formulation that's different than the rest of the country, you did not experience lower gasoline prices. Okay. So that's one of the challenges of living in California, is not only do we have a special gas formulations that refineries have to supply, but also we have less refining capacity now than we had before. And so gasoline prices in California tend to not drop in concert with the rest of the country. Okay, now going back to energy services, okay, electricity went up 3%, natural gas went up 1.8%. So if you have an all electric home, and you may have experienced inflation at a higher rate than if you have a home like mine, where I have natural gas stovetop and natural gas heating. Okay, but in any event, energy services didn't go up a whole lot. Okay, now all other items went up a total of 3.3%. Commodities, less food and energy, actually went down 0.6%. Services, less food and energy, went up 4.6%. Okay, so let's look at these. So apparel went up, the cost of apparel went up 1%. New vehicles went down 0.7%. Used cars went down by 3.4%. Let's see. Trying to see what this is. Okay. Alcoholic beverages went down, or went up 0.4%, so essentially unchanged. No, I'm sorry. What is it? Oh, alcoholic beverages, I'm sorry, went up 1.8%, so a little bit. I'm trying to see what this one is. It doesn't want to let me see it. Okay, and tobacco and smoking products went up 6.6%. Okay, so if you are a smoker, what's going on? Well, the settlement that states made with the tobacco companies now quite some time ago has you'll, excuse the pun, addicted states to the money that they get from the addicted states to the money they got from the tobacco companies. Now, some of those agreements, I think, are running out now, and so in order to keep that that supply of tax money coming in, states are raising taxes on tobacco and smoking products. Okay, so you are never going to see tobacco and smoking products decrease in price. Forever after, they're going to go up in price, and the idea is basically to make smoking so expensive that people just won't do it anymore. Okay, and given that the people most likely to smoke are people at lower income levels, that strategy may work. Now, you might say, well, gosh, that's somewhat dishonest. If they want to ban smoking, they should just ban smoking. I would tend to agree with that argument, but people in this country tend not to like having things banned, and so they wouldn't vote for something like that. And so this is kind of a backdoor way for public officials to decrease smoking. Okay, so that is the inflation picture. Oops, what do I? Here we go. Okay. Next, we're going to look at the local inflation picture. Okay. So we're going to look at, I look at Los Angeles because that's where I live, but you can find these figures for your area. All you need to do is do a web search for CPI, Consumer Price Index, and then your locality: Omaha, Nebraska, Miami, Florida, Dallas, Texas. Okay, and you'll get these numbers. So so for the Los Angeles area, which includes Los Angeles, Long Beach, Anaheim, okay, the Consumer Price Index actually dropped 0.2% over the past month, but it's still up 3.2% for the year. Okay, so that's so as has been the case for quite some time now, the overall inflation rate for Los Angeles has been higher than the national rate, and the core inflation rate went up 4.1% in Los Angeles, as opposed to 3.3% nationally, right? So again, we see that California is not only a more expensive place to live, but becoming an ever more but our prices are, at least in Los Angeles, are increasing more rapidly than the country as a whole. All right. Food prices increased 0.7% last month. Prices for food at home went up also 0.7%. Okay, and prices for food away from home increased 0.6%. So prices for food away from home actually went up less in the Los Angeles area than nationally. Okay, but we're talking. Actually, it's I think a percent. Right, so. I'm sorry, but this is for the monthly period. Okay, so year over year, food prices went up 3.5%. Food at home increased 2%. Food for home away from home went up 5.1%. So food prices are increasing at double or more of the national average. Actually, almost 3 times the national average for food away from home here in the Los Angeles area. Okay, so. Again, not only is Los Angeles a more expensive place to live, but its prices are increasing here faster than they are in the rest of the country. Okay, energy, excuse me, went down 1.8%. It was due mainly to for the month. It was due to lower gasoline prices, which dropped 2%. Okay, prices for natural gas decreased 6.3% for the month. Wow, that's a big increase. Okay, prices for electricity declined 1/10% for the month. So in other words, we're essentially unchanged. So overall, energy prices declined 8.6% over the year over year, due largely to lower gasoline prices, 12.4%. Okay, so but also prices for natural gas declined 12.8%, and prices for electricity declined 0.7%, or almost 1%. So we are seeing energy prices going down here in California. Now, that does contradict what I was saying about the special formulations for gasoline here in California and the declining refining capacity. I think one of the reasons why we're seeing lower gasoline prices is because California has adopted electric cars at a higher percentage, I think, than any other state in the union. So that may be having an impact. That may be impacting gasoline prices in a positive way. So I know for me, I don't have an electric car. I have no plans to buy an electric car. Don't want an electric car, until unless and until they're much better, they're much less expensive, and the infrastructure for them is built out. But so I'm happy to let everybody else adopt them and lower gasoline prices. Okay, and then for the so-called core inflation, all items except food and energy, okay, that they declined 2% in November, led by apparel, which went down 1.6%, and recreation, which went down 0.8%. Okay, there were higher prices for home furnishings at 0.5% and shelter at 0.2%. Now, over the year, the core inflation rate for Los Angeles rose 4.1%, again, higher than the national rate of 3.3%. So the components contributing most to that increase are medical care, went up 8.4%, and shelter went up 4.6%. And these were partially offset by a decrease in the prices of new and used vehicles. Here's the thing, though. If you didn't buy a car in the last year, who cares that vehicle prices went down? You didn't buy a vehicle, so that didn't help you out. Okay, so if like me, you're living in California and you're feeling like, gee, I don't know, it seems like inflation went up more here, that would certainly be the case. And for those, if you feel like you're falling ever farther behind, especially compared to the rest of the country, that is certainly the case. Our prices are increasing more rapidly than the rest of the country. Okay, next we're going to look at real earnings. Okay. All right, here we go. And let me make this larger so you can see it better. All right. So real average hourly earnings were flat October through November. Okay. And they were up 14 cents year over year. Okay. Or basically 1%. Okay. So why is that important? Well, inflation went up 2.7%. Hourly earnings went up 1%. So if you're feeling like you're falling behind, you are. Okay. Now let's look at weekly earnings. Okay. So weekly earnings went up $1.34. Okay. $1.34, going from October to November. And that is 0.3%. So, obviously, not a lot. And again, that barely kept pace with, that just kept pace with inflation. So you're not getting ahead but you're not falling behind. So why the difference between real average hourly earnings and weekly earnings? It's just the way that they're calculated. So the bottom line is, and then that you see average hourly earnings went up 0.4%. Average. By the way, part of the difference between average hourly earnings and average weekly earnings is it comes from what is the average weekly hours worked, and so people worked a little bit more, and so that's why weekly earnings went up. So, hourly rates did not change, but people worked a little bit more, and so that's why the average hourly earnings went up. Okay, excuse me. So, um, um, so, uh, so you can see that you're really not, gaining any kind of significant ground because the rate at which earnings are increasing is essentially matched by inflation. And so again, if you're feeling like, gosh, I really I don't feel any better off than I was, that data that certainly matches the data. Now, I don't have the local data for earnings, unfortunately. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the unemployment rate. Okay, and all right, so the unemployment rate overall in November was 4.2%. That was up just 0.1% from October. Okay, so for all intents and purposes, it was flat. Now for men 20 years and over, okay, the unemployment rate was 3.9%, which was flat, literally flat from last month. For women 20 and older, the unemployment rate also 3.9% for November. That is up from 3.6%. So it actually went up, significantly for women. Okay, and then for 16 to 19-year-olds, it went down to 13% from 13.8%, but it's dropped almost over a percentage point since September. Okay, now I think we're going to find when we look at the figures for workforce participation, that the reason the unemployment rate went down for 16 to 19-year-olds is fewer of them are participating in the workforce. So as I always mention, unemployment rates can't be looked at in isolation. They have to be looked at in concert with workforce participation rates, because the unemployment rate only measures the percentage of people who are looking for jobs who don't have a job. Okay, and so if fewer people are looking for a job, that can lower the unemployment rate, even though the number of people working hasn't changed or has actually dropped. Okay, so the two work in concert. All right, now let's look by demographic. Okay, the unemployment rate for white workers, 3.8% in November, which is, I think, the same, in October. Okay, for Black Americans, the unemployment rate was 6.4% in November, up from 5.7% in October. It's a 0.7% increase, 0.75%. Now, is that because more Black Americans entered the workforce, or is it because fewer had jobs? We'll look at the workforce participation rates in a minute, and we'll see if we can figure that out. Okay, the unemployment rate for Asian Americans, 3.8%. last month, for November versus 3.9% for October. So essentially unchanged. And then for Latinos, the unemployment rate for November, 5.3% versus 5.1% in October. Also a pretty small change. Okay, so okay, so that's the national unemployment rate figures, and I'm gonna show you real quickly the unemployment, the state unemployment rates. I think we looked at this same this same data last month. We haven't gotten the November data yet, but as is perennially the case, South Dakota ranks number one with a 1.9% unemployment rate, and Nevada, District of Columbia, California, 5.4, 5.7, perennially the highest unemployment rates. So most states, you can see here. Oops, I didn't. Oh, sorry about that. I didn't. Okay, I didn't enlarge the chart. But most states, you can see, have unemployment rates between 2.9% and about 3.94%. So for most states have employment rates between 3 and 4%. So the outliers are South Dakota, Vermont, North Dakota, New Hampshire. Okay. And then on the other end, there are states like Rhode Island, Michigan, New Jersey, South Carolina, Washington, Kentucky, Illinois, California. Okay. So, not to make this a political discussion, but you can see that in general, the states with the highest unemployment rates tend to be states with much more liberal governments. That's certainly true of Washington, D.C. and California and Illinois. Kentucky less so, certainly true of Washington and New Jersey and Michigan and Rhode Island, right? And the exception would be Alaska and South Carolina and Kentucky. Those states must have some structural problems that they're dealing with. Okay, so I don't want to take a whole lot of time there because, like I said, I think we covered that same chart in more depth last month. So now we're going to look at civilian labor force participation, so we get a fuller picture of what's happening with people working. Okay, so the civilian labor force participation rate was 62.5% in November, down slightly from 62.6%. So I think the unemployment rate was essentially flat. So that kind of makes sense. So there was a very small drop in people looking for work that could have caused a small drop in the unemployment rate. But when we're talking 0.1% or zero, there's not really statistically a real difference there. Now, for men 20 years and older, we're up here. Okay, so the labor force participation rate, 70.3% in November, 70.5% in October, just a small change. It's kind of been hovering right at that level, so not particularly significant. Okay, for women, 58.7% in November, and that was flat with October. So again, we're seeing why there wasn't a big change for those. Now, for 16 to 19-year-olds, where we saw a big drop in unemployment, right? The labor force participation rate was 36.2% in November, which is up from 35.8%. So that's interesting. So the drop in teen unemployment did not come from fewer people looking for work. Indeed, the participation rate is higher November versus October, which means a lot more teens got jobs. Now, this may be because stores are hiring for the holiday season. In fact, that's likely to be what it is. holiday hiring. Okay, so this would be kind of a temporary bump here. But so we'll see what happens. When we look at the December figures and then into January. But that would seem to be the reason why we're seeing lower teen unemployment. Okay, so for white Americans, the workforce participation rate 62.1%, down, again, 0.1%, essentially unchanged from last month. For Black Americans, labor force participation rate also unchanged, 58.7% October versus November. For Asian Americans, November participation rate 64.7 versus 65.5. So a significant drop, and a 0.8% drop in the Asian labor force participation rate, which is why we saw a drop in Asian unemployment. Okay, and then finally for Latinos. Okay, so the workforce participation rate in November 66.9, and that was flat with October. So again, in looking at the two, unemployment and workforce participation, that oftentimes explains why these change. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to enlarge that chart, but in any way, okay. So now, okay, employment by industry is coming up next. And I will remember to enlarge the chart. There we go. Okay, so as has been the trend for as long as I've been doing these economic echoes shows, so largest gains in unemployment in November came in private health and private education and health services. So there were 79,000 new jobs, a 0.3% increase. And the next largest, leisure and hospitality, 53,000. And then government jobs, 33,000. Those are the three biggest. Now, biggest business and professional services had a significant change, and that's good because they've been much lower. Manufacturing has seen 22,000 new jobs in November, and construction 10,000. So you're seeing all sectors except for utilities, which lost 100 jobs, and retail trade, which lost 28,000 jobs. So all industry sectors actually saw at least minimal job gains. Okay, well, information had zero. And only one sector, retail trade, saw any significant loss in jobs. So let's break this down as we do. So as is the case, private educational services saw a little bit of an increase. The real big increases in private education and health services in terms of new jobs is in healthcare and social assistance, which are driven by government spending. Okay, so and you can see in all sectors of healthcare, they went up. And then looking next at government. Okay, so federal government actually shed some jobs, whereas state and local governments continued to increase jobs. Okay, and so the real driver of job increases, two of the three largest categories, is really being driven by government spending. Okay, the third big one, leisure and hospitality. So you can see big gains in both arts, entertainment, and recreation, and accommodation and food services. As we drill down, we see that it's in performing arts and spectator sports and amusement and gambling and recreation. That's really where they saw museums and historical sites not doing nearly as well. And then on the accommodation and food, so we saw really the big gains were in food services and drinking places. Okay, so that's where the gains are coming there. And then looking at business services. Okay, so Its professional, scientific, and technical services saw the biggest. Management of companies actually declined. So companies are becoming leaner by getting rid of management. And then administrative and support also saw some pretty big gains. Okay, and this is interesting, looking at professional, scientific, and technical services. Where are the real big gains? Architectural, engineering, and related services. So in other words, services related to construction. Okay, that's really where we saw the big gain in jobs. And that makes sense because we are still seeing growth in construction jobs. Okay, now let's look at one more. Let's look at manufacturing. Okay, so durable goods manufacturing accounted for all of the increase because non-durable goods employment actually shrunk. So where do we see it? The gains in durable equipment, durable goods manufacturing is in transportation equipment manufacturing. That's really where all the gains came from. Most of the other sections lost or were unchanged, interestingly enough. Okay, so this is transportation equipment manufacturing. I think would be cars, that sort of thing. Now, contrast that with non-durable goods, where except for chemical manufacturing, everything else lost jobs or were essentially unchanged. I mean, tiny 100 jobs in textile mills again, but almost all non-durable goods there was had job losses in that industry. Now, by the way, this is the 1 month picture we're looking at. Okay, so now let's look at the 12-month picture. So you can see in the 12-month picture over the last year, what's really driven job growth has been private education and health services and the government, which again is really government spending. And you'll notice that although manufacturing jobs increased last month, November, year over year, they still have dropped by 61,000. Business services had a 0.4% increase over the last year, which is much smaller than the percentage increase they had for just November. Construction has had bigger job growth year over year, or over the last year, I should say. But notice that when looking at the 1 month picture, it's gotten much smaller. That would tend to indicate that it's slowing down. Okay, now maybe with the increase in architectural and engineering services, maybe we can anticipate that jobs in construction are going to start increasing again. We'll need to keep an eye on that. Okay, so if you are in one of these sectors, it's important to be tracking this to see what are my job prospects going forward. Okay, and if I am considering making a change in industry, where is it likely to see job growth coming? And that's why I've been talking about some of these things. Now, we're seeing big gains in government, in jobs that are fueled by government payment. I would anticipate as we head into next year with the change in administration, we're going to start to see a decrease in government job growth, especially in the federal government. So federal government jobs decreased by 2,000 in November. Okay. That was essentially due to the U.S. Postal Service. Okay. You can see that non-postal service jobs went up by, they went up by 700 jobs. Okay. My point is that, if President Trump, along with the two men he chose to run the Department of Government Efficiency, Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, really, are able to do what they want to do, presumably we will see job shrinkage, if you will, in both of these categories, the federal government and the U.S. Postal Service. And by the way, one of the things they're talking about is privatizing the U.S. Postal Service. And those discussions have been going on for decades, of course. But unfortunately for the U.S. Postal Service, it becomes more and more irrelevant as time goes by. And so it becomes easier to do that. There's going to come a point, by the way, that right now total employment is 600,000 for the Postal Service. Wow, that's still a lot. But there's going to come a point where the Postal Service has lost so many jobs that it's no longer going to have the political weight that it may currently have to maintain itself. And so that's probably the point at which the Postal Service will be privatized. By the way, there is precedent for that. Germany privatized its postal service now quite a number of years ago. I know when I lived in Germany, I believe it's DHL ran the postal service. Okay, and if you've ever had packages delivered by DHL, the fact of the matter is they're a much more efficient organization than the U.S. Postal Service. Okay, so now let's look at okay. I think we looked at industry employment by state for October last month, so I'm not going to cover that. And the same thing with job openings. I only have the date. Okay, so I'm going to move to median home price. Okay, so the median home price in the United States went up by 2.5% over the last year to $357,469. Okay, so that's a significant increase in home prices. Now let's look at some local markets. Let's look at Omaha, Nebraska. Okay, Omaha, Nebraska went up by 2.4%, so pretty much in line with the national average. But median home price in Omaha, Nebraska is only about $276,000, so considerably lower than the national average. Okay, now let's look at Miami. Miami, I'll learn how to spell. Okay, Miami, Florida. Okay, Miami, Florida median housing price went up 5.5%, so more than double the national average, and it's getting up towards 600,000. So as more and more people move to Florida, and in particular Miami, you can see that their housing prices are going up higher than the national average. Okay, let's look at another popular relocation market. Let's look at Dallas, Texas. Okay, interesting. Dallas, Texas went down 0.5%, so essentially unchanged. But they're at $306,000, significantly lower than Florida. Okay, now let's look at cities where people are leaving, and Los Angeles, California certainly qualifies as a place people are leaving. So Los Angeles, California, median home price went up 1.5%. In other words, lower than the national average, but you can see that the median home price in Los Angeles, California, $952,000. So, a 1.5% increase in a median home price in California still probably put more money in a home seller's pocket if they sold their home than a 2.5% increase did or 2.4% increase did for someone in Omaha, right? That's one of the trade-offs of the market. Now let's look at one other. Let's look at San Jose, California. Okay, wow, San Jose, California went up a whopping 8.3%. Median home price, $1.4 million. This is the heart of Silicon Valley. So despite what else may be happening in California, the tech industry is still thriving and it's still driving higher median home prices. Okay, so that gives you, and I would play around with this in your own location to see how median home prices, what's happening with them in your market. Okay, now let's look at rental market trends. Okay, so let's look at the same markets. Let's look first of all at Omaha, Nebraska. Okay, so Omaha, Nebraska, month over month change, $19 increase, $126 change year over year. So it had about let's see, 10, a little over a 1% increase in November. Okay, and also 30, like a 0.5% increase year over year. Okay, and so not real big increases happening in the Omaha, Nebraska rental market. But you can see, and here, this is a nice thing to look at, is where are the majority of units available. And while they range from $500 a month to $4,200, the reality is most are in the range of about $700, $800 to about $2,000, right around in there. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the rental market there. Now let's look at Miami, Florida. Okay, so Miami, Florida, month over month change, $42, which is a little over 1% again, but year over year change is $150 decrease, right? So rents actually decreased in Miami year over year, but that decrease, that's actually really pretty small relative to we're talking about what? Well, yeah, 0.5%. So it's a 0.5% decrease. Okay. Now, what's interesting in the Miami market is the most number of units available are in the very like high-end luxury market, the $5,000 a month plus. Evidently, they go all the way up to $200,000. Okay, so you can see that rental prices over time have been decreasing. They went up in the middle of the year, but now they've been going down of late. Okay, now let's look at, what do we look at? Dallas, Texas. Okay, so Dallas, Texas too, just small changes, not really statistically significant. And you can see they've been, roughly flat here. They were way up in August, and since then they've come down. Okay, and again, you can see in the Dallas market, it almost looks like a combination of Nebraska and Miami, in that you have a lot of units from $900 to, in this case, about $2,800, but then there's also a lot of units available at $5,000 a month or more. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the maturity of the Dallas market. Okay, now let's look at Los Angeles. Okay, so rents in Los Angeles were essentially flat, and you can see that in the chart here. They've pretty much been flat all year. Okay, they had a little bit of a jump in October, but really they've been pretty much flat all year. And the majority of units available in Los Angeles are from about $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 to, into the $3,000 a month level, and then a whole bunch of high-end units. And you can see top end of the market is $250,000 a month. Wow. Okay, so rental, in terms of renting in Los Angeles, renters have seen pretty stable rates. And then finally, San Jose. Okay, so again, essentially no change month over month, up $100 year over year, just a small change. And you can see that there's a very broad range of rental rates in San Jose, from around $1,000, $1,200 all the way up to over $5,000. You can see there's units available in all those categories. So rents have not, in all these markets, rents really haven't gone up a whole lot anywhere in the country, okay, which is good news if you're a renter like me. But in your own market, I recommend that you track this if you're a renter, so you get a sense of what might be happening in the marketplace next year in terms of your cost for housing. Okay, and then I brought up one new thing that I wanted to show you for this week. Yeah. Okay. So this is a consumer sentiment survey. Let me make this larger for you. Okay. So, oops, wrong one. Okay. So, this is the preliminary results for December. Okay. And this is consumer sentiment. Index of consumer sentiment is up 3% month over month, meaning November to December, and over 6% from December of last year to December of this year. Okay. Current economic conditions, okay, up a whopping almost 22% month over month. Okay. Why did it go up so much? Well, that's the election. Okay. You're seeing some enthusiasm because of the election. Okay. And that's an interesting thing. Now, the index of consumer expectations actually dropped 7%. And that's because although expectations among Republicans went up, they just cratered for Democrats. And so the drop in consumer expectation among Democrats was so great, it pulled down the overall rate. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, overall, consumer expectations, except for Democrats, so among Republicans and independents, consumer expectations have improved markedly going from November to December. And why is this important? Well, as we expect things to go, oftentimes they will go. So if we're talking about people starting new businesses, expanding businesses, which creates more job opportunity, all of that is at least partly related to consumer sentiment. So if I don't think the economy is going to be good, I'm not going to expand my business. If I do think the economy is going to be good, I'm more likely to take that risk. Okay, that also has to do with consumption patterns. So if I think the economy is going to be better going forward, I'm more likely to buy a new car. Maybe I've been holding off, but then I'll do it. I'm more likely to buy new furniture. I'm more likely perhaps to buy a house. So positive consumer sentiment is a good thing for the economy, because that's what undergirds the economy starting to grow. Now, does projected consumer sentiment always turn into economic growth? And the answer is no, it does not. We're just seeing a 1-month phenomenon right now. And so we're going to need to watch this trend. And I will be following this month by month, so we can kind of see how these things play out. So all of this information, I go through it, and I go through it in a fair amount of detail, because I want to help you learn how to parse this data. So there is a television commercial I see quite often, because I'm a big fan of The Big Bang Theory, and it's a Progressive insurance commercial, and it's the regular people they have in the commercial standing around a kitchen, and they're talking about the economy, and a young boy asks, "What's the economy?" And they can't answer the question. Now, without getting on anybody's case, it is kind of funny that a company that calls itself Progressive can't answer the question, "What is the economy?" But what's funny, what's really funny for our purposes is they can't answer the question, right? And we don't want that to be us. We want to know what the economy is, right? The economy is the summing up of all the economic interactions of people living in the United States. It's the summing up of all our decisions to buy or not buy, to keep our job or to change our job, to start a business, to not start a business, to close a business. All of any economic decision you can think of, whether it's to do something or to not do something, all of those come together. That makes up the economy. And in order to make as good decisions as possible, we need to understand this data. And so that's why each month I go through this, because hopefully you gain ever greater economic literacy by working through this with me. So I'm going to continue to do this into next year, and I'm going to continue to look for other indicators that I think will help you better understand what's happening in the economy. So that is our show for today. I thank you for watching. Thank you for joining me, especially my live viewers. Always great to see you there. And tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific time is my show, Jiggers' Place. This is my non-business related show. I'm going to take you to the South Seas for a Tahitian breeze and to talk about the Mutiny on the Bounty. I'm going to be talking about the book. I'm going to be talking about the actual Mutiny on the Bounty and the movies, all of those things. And for those of us in the chilly northern climes, we're going to go down to the South Seas where it's summertime this time of year. So I hope you'll join me again tomorrow, Thursday at 5 p.m. And then next week on Monday is my show, Trust and Estates Weekly. I'm going to be talking about some ways that you can make charitable contributions and get an even bigger tax benefit than you might otherwise think. So that's on Monday. And then on Tuesday, which is Christmas Eve, I am going to be doing a special show, a special edition for Christmas Eve. And you may be thinking, why is the rabbi doing a Christmas Eve show? And that's because the fact of the matter is Christmas is a much more important holiday for Christians than Hanukkah is for Jews. And so I want to do this kind of a tribute to all my Christian friends and viewers out there. So that'll be at the regular time, 10 a.m. on Tuesday. So once again, thank you so much for joining me. Appreciate it very much. Any questions, comments, of course, drop them into the social media, send me an email. And signing off because I'm a little bit late here, as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my bell. Courage at all times.